Have you ever wondered why you feel blocked or a complete fear of showing yourself publicly to the world? Do you have alcoholism or drug abuse in your family lineage? Do you find it difficult to be affectionate or show love towards others, or even say, "I love you"? Do you feel passionately angry when you see unfairness in the world? If so, this is the episode for you. In this episode, I'm going to explore generational and ancestral trauma, what I've done to heal any possible ancestral trauma in my life, and then give you some tips to help you release any possible trauma from your ancestral line that you may have and you don't realize, or maybe you do realize. So, the reason I've decided to do an episode on ancestral trauma is that I've actually been through this deep healing myself, and it's still ongoing. I'm still healing and I'm releasing it, and the relief, the absolute weight that's lifted off my shoulders is very noticeable. I feel a little lighter. I felt a little lighter as soon as it happened. And then the more I do it, the more subtle the feeling is. But it's definitely a noticeable thing. And I know because I'll explain a little bit more what exactly I healed. But I can see the results because I've lost fear, I've stopped ancestral habits, and so on. So why am I doing this? The reason why I'm doing this is to free myself from fear. I had a huge fear of showing myself to the world, like publicly, online. Because I'm a teacher, I'm an English teacher, a coach, and I'm also now focusing on healing. Before I used to try and do videos and put them online, and I just felt ridiculous and really shameful. And I had to go in. That kind of led me to go in. One of the reasons why I went on my inward journey was that, why have I got that fear? And I had to keep asking myself different questions in order to get different answers. And one of the things that I came across was healing ancestral trauma from your family lineage. So in order to free myself from fear of showing myself to the world or heal any shame, I started to do this healing. Also, what I discovered through my ancestral line was that there is a pattern of alcoholism, of heart blockages, as in walls, as in there have been stony hearts, if that makes any sense, through my ancestral line. Now, it's nobody's fault. I want to make that clear. Everybody in my ancestral line did what they did because they thought it was right, and whatever it took for them to survive and get through their day-to-day and to provide for their families. I'm talking about not just my family, obviously, or my grandparents' family, but theirs, and so on, and much further back into my ancestral line in Ireland. So also, that what I came across was a lot of anger, maybe eating issues, and self-love blocks. And these all stem from different things. I'm not sure if you're aware of Irish history, but we had a huge famine. I think I mentioned this in my last episode about witches, but there was a great hunger in Ireland and a huge famine, and millions of people died and also emigrated. And that itself creates a lot of pain and suffering and trauma, memories and different tendencies, and a lot of things can be passed through DNA, and one of those is trauma. And you can imagine that, like, that big huge famine definitely had an impact on anybody who lived in Ireland's ancestral line. And I think I have related that to my eating issues, because I just sometimes cannot stop eating. And my sister's the same. I hope she doesn't mind me saying this. And I always wondered why, because we didn't come from a family of scarcity. My sister and I used to just eat every single thing that was on our plate, like still. And we still do, even if we're full. So when I kind of associated that with that starving trauma that Ireland went through years and years and years and years ago, it kind of clicked. And I kind of understood, and that awareness in itself was a healing. So one of the most important steps in healing ancestral trauma is awareness, and finding as much research as possible. Doing like research on your family, asking your parents or whoever your caregivers were. Maybe your parents, maybe you aren't somebody who was blood related to their caregivers, and that doesn't matter, because we can still take on ancestral trauma from our caregivers through different habits and the way that we've been brought up. But also it might be interesting to research your actual blood relatives and see what patterns and what traumas and what happened in their lives. So going back onto the topic, another thing that I discovered through my ancestral line, and that's quite common throughout Ireland, is alcoholism. And I made the decision to kind of give up alcohol about 2 years ago, and I was kind of on and off. And with the help of going to peer support, it really has really helped just keep me on track. And that is something that is apparent in my family, and it's definitely apparent in a lot of families across Ireland. And that could have stemmed from lots of different things. It could have come from the suppression that Ireland went through when we were fighting, before we started to fight for our freedom, when we still are an English colony, when we went through that repression and colonialism time. There's a lot of reasons why. Well, not factual reasons, they're not scientific reasons, but they are alcoholism is apparent in a lot of Irish families, and I'm just speculating here maybe why. But anyway, so that is something that is also apparent in my ancestral line. Another one is self-love blocks that I grew up with. Now, that could have stemmed from different things. In my last episode, I did harden my heart growing up from different kind of situations, like normal human things. And also what I didn't mention in my last episode was that it could also have stemmed from my ancestors, because back in Ireland in like a long time ago, when we were like fighting for our freedom and were suppressed and went through a lot of pain and suffering and trauma, and like the people had to survive and get on with it and just be strong and not feel sorry for themselves and not like crave pity. Whatever was wrong with you, you did what you had to do and get on with it. And maybe that caused a lot of families, not just my family and not just my ancestors, to harden their hearts. And maybe we weren't in the situation, or we weren't in the position to be a loving, caring family to each other, because There was, for lots of different reasons. I really don't know why we were the way we were, but we were. And I can notice that throughout both my ancestral lines, maybe, the words I love you wasn't really used very much until my later years, especially in my family. Like, we didn't really tell each other we loved each other until a few years ago. And that was something that we just grew up with. And that was something that my parents grew up with. And that was something that their parents grew up with. So, but now it's all different. It's definitely changed a little bit. If you can imagine that generational trauma can be stored as data is stored in the cloud, well, trauma can be stored in our DNA just like data is stored in the cloud or on a computer. So it gets carried down. Any pain or suffering, habits, behaviors can all be carried down. Another ancestral type of trauma can be a collective ancestral trauma. And that can also be carried forward from a group of people and even on a country scale, even such as Ireland. And that actual ancestral trauma can also be embedded into the country itself. If you can imagine different places in the world that suffered severe trauma, like Auschwitz, all those concentration camps, anywhere that suffered the Holocausts, all of that severely, like absolute dreadful suffering is stored in the actual earth itself. And there are people working on that to release that and heal that energy. So it's the same as a collective or a country level. We can also suffer together as a collective. Another collective pain or ancestral trauma on a collective scale can also appear all of a sudden, especially when we're triggered, when we see unfair treatment throughout the world, especially what's going on now with Israel and Palestine. A lot of anger and instant retaliation and trauma, ancestral trauma, might bubble up, especially if you're from a country that suffered through colonialism or suffered through oppression or fought for your freedom, and that's all like ancestral and generational and a collective trauma that's been embedded and ingrained and buried and carried through generations. Another thing that popped up for me was controlling. Now, I'm sure my family members who are listening to this are going to be laughing their heads off, because we always reflect back on each other when we're saying, "You're so controlling," and then my sister or my mom might say, "Well, no, you're so controlling. I get it from you. Well, you give it to me." And it's a controlling thing. And I know for a fact that is an ancestral thing. It's an ancestral trait that has been passed down through our family line, and it's nobody's fault. In fact, it serves us very well. Controlling can be a positive trait, because especially when you're bringing up a family and you have lots of children to manage, and you need to provide them, you need to fight for the best for your family, that's really beneficial. But then in some other aspects, controlling can be really draining. And like, if nowadays, if we're fighting over who's right and who's wrong and where we should go and what we should do and who should do this and why they should do that, and forcing things on to other people when they're not interested in it, that's draining. And it's like we're losing our energy by trying to encourage people to do things that we think is good for them, and it's a good thing that we're doing. But at the end of the day, it's control. And controlling in that sense, even though it's coming from a good place, it's not really beneficial for anyone unless they're open to receiving it. And if they asked for advice, like unsolicited advice, because you think somebody else might benefit from it, is a little form of controlling. If I see somebody who's really, really sick, and a lot of the time I do this, I'm like just forcing them, take some ginger, honey, lemon, all of this, and they're probably thinking to themselves, yes, Sarah, I know, I'm doing whatever it takes to make myself feel better. But it's like an innate kind of thing that comes out of me. It's a little kind of advice that they didn't ask for, and maybe they don't need. But it's a controlling trait. So that's another thing that I've been working on, is to release that controlling factor, because it doesn't really serve anyone unless it's been solicited, if the advice has been solicited or asked for. So my questions at the beginning of the episode was, have you ever wondered why you feel blocked, or do you feel blocked? Have you got a complete fear of showing yourself publicly to the world? And my answer was yes. I had a huge fear, and that's how I released it, through obviously self-worth is a part of that too, and releasing fear and shame. But yes, also healing ancestral trauma was something that was very beneficial in that question. Do you have alcoholism or drug abuse in your family line? My answer was yes. And what I also did was the awareness of that it's nobody's fault. Nobody did anything wrong. Everybody always did everything for the good of everyone else involved, and for coping skills and survival skills, and whatever it took. So awareness was the first part in healing, and then that healing. I'm going to give you some tips on how to release this in a minute, but I also applied that technique. Do you find it difficult to be affectionate or show love towards others when they say I love you? That was huge for me. I found it even difficult to ask someone how they were. Can you actually believe that? Because it just wasn't something that happened in my house, and it wasn't something that happened in my parents' house. How are you? When you woke up in the morning, you went downstairs, there wasn't any good mornings or anything like that. And I don't even think we say good morning even today. We don't wake up and go to each other, good morning, like they do over here in Spain. Everybody says good morning, good evening, good night over here. And I don't know if it could be an Irish thing as well. But anyway, it didn't happen in my house and probably won't ever happen. Do you find it difficult to forgive somebody? Unforgiveness is one of the biggest weights we can carry on our shoulders, and it's so hard to forgive. It's probably the number one most difficult thing a human can do, is to forgive. Especially if you've been through colossal pain, like unforgiving torture. And it's absolutely understandable that it's just too hard. It seems impossible to forgive. Is that something that has been carried down through your generations, your ancestral lineage? If so, would you be interested in releasing and letting it go? If so, that's amazing, because that is a huge healing, not only through your ancestors, but also for the future. A big, huge reason, and a really important reason for doing this is that we can heal our future siblings, our future children, the future of our families as well. Not just the past, but the future. And we're paving the way for less suffering in the future, less or fewer blockages in our children and our children's children and our nieces and nephews and our grandchildren. You know, we're releasing anger so they don't have to carry it. We're letting go of control so we don't pass it on down to them either. And unforgiveness and forgiveness is just something that is so hard. I recommend and I suggest that you can forgive the person but not the action. So if that helps, you can forgive the person but not the action. And that even is a big weight. That's a huge weight off anyone's shoulders, because you're forgiving the person for what they did, because what they did was wrong, and you don't have to forgive the thing that they did, but you can forgive them. Does everybody deserve a second chance? That's how you spot ancestral trauma, by basically doing research and seeing if there are any patterns that you're repeating or any patterns that you're mirroring. How do we clear this ancestral trauma? Well, the first step is becoming aware that we're continuing a pattern that has been handed down, would you say? A pattern or a habit that's been going through our ancestral lineage. And when everything that we become aware of is a little healing in itself. It's like a release and let go of a little blockage. Step 2, we can create a healing ceremony. And I'm going to provide you a meditation actually to help you with this, because it's easier said than done. Well, it's actually easier to listen. It might be easier for you to listen to something, to follow my guidelines to help you actually clear and heal this ancestral trauma. Then step 3 is a chakra clearing. And after that clearing is a replacement of love throughout all of your energy centers, which I'll also send you an audio in the show notes so that you can follow these two. One important thing I recommend doing throughout all of this healing ancestral lineage is to have a notepad and pen and write out all of your emotions, all of the information that you found, to actually write it down, because that in itself is like a self-therapy, because you're releasing energy that has been carried down through your ancestors and family line. So I recommend having a pen and paper and writing every single step of the way down, acknowledging your feelings, how you feel into that feeling, and obviously breathe deeply throughout the whole process. And if writing on paper isn't something for you, then create a WhatsApp message to you from you. You have to add somebody else in first to make a group. So imagine you add somebody else and there's a group, and then you delete them, and then that's a WhatsApp message from you to you, and that's called a voice journal. So that's what I do really. If I don't have a pen and paper with me, I just voice journal to myself. And it's really important to document this whole thing, just because it's another form of releasing and letting go, and it's like talk therapy or pen to paper therapy, if that even exists. So yeah, it's just like letting it out, letting off steam. So please get in touch with me and let me know how you've gotten on with this ritual, this healing ritual, to help you release and let go of generational ancestral trauma throughout your family lineage. Remember, if you come across any heavy trauma that's unmanageable, please get in contact with a professional, because this can be a bit of a tough journey for some people, you're more than welcome to reach out to me and I'll help you as best as I can. But I'm not a professional in dealing with trauma. I'm a person who has healing tools that can facilitate healing, but I'm not an expert in psychological trauma or anything like that. So please get in contact with somebody if you find that you need some assistance with that. I'm really looking forward to your comments and hearing how you get on. And remember, if you'd like to work with me, my details are in the show notes. I hope you've enjoyed this episode and see you next week. Bye bye.